right.
So when Pam pops up on the top right, just click on hide non-video participants. Just do that.
It says show on video.
Okay, just say stop video. Okay.
All right, are we good?
Yep.
All right. Well, I will call this regular meeting of the Scio Township Budget and Finance Standing Committee to order at, what is it? 10:08 a.m. on April 21st, 2022. We'll ask the secretary to please call the roll.
Flintoff,
Here?
Hathaway,
Present.
Palmer,
So as I am not a voting member, we do have a quorum. Are there corrections or additions to the agenda as presented?
I would just say, David, the two items of mine, the administrative cost allowance, I intended that to just be a discussion about related to the open space millage.
Oh, okay.
So those two are in one.
So it's just one item?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
all right. I misunderstood that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And I didn't see minutes. Were they distributed?
Yeah, they were in the, they were attached to the
meeting
to the
notes?
website.
Oh, to the website.
Yeah,
Oh,
they've been out for, I don't know, 2
Yeah.
weeks, 3
Yeah.
weeks?
Okay, sorry. I was looking in the wrong place.
Oh my goodness.
Can you mute the public until it's time for public comments, please?
sure.
What?
It's time to resign, Hathaway.
Okay, yeah,
Somewhere.
just keep your eye on that. All right.
Is, both of you found them? As long as I say, I did not include them with the agenda because they had been out
Yeah, that's fine.
for such a
Yep.
period of time.
Got it.
That makes sense. It's just I didn't, when I looked for them, I didn't.
No, I understand, yeah.
Motion to adopt the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Oh, find them.
Can you find them? Okay.
What, can we postpone that until I can find them?
You're welcome.
Scroll. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. I will second that. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the special meeting of March 17th as presented. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved as presented. Next item is public comment. We have a couple of people in the room. Does either one of you wish to speak at this point? If not, do we have anyone on Zoom who would like to address the committee through public comment? If you would raise your Zoom hand, please, we will call on you as you are recognized.
Let's see. There's Kathleen Brandt. Kathleen Brandt.
Yes, I'm here. This is Kathleen Brandt. My comments, I want to talk about the administrative cost allowance discussion. If there are additional meetings with this for the Board of Trustees, I would like to participate in that, please. And I will also request that any of those meetings have attendance by a certified public accountant. I think some of the board meeting members do not understand the concept of cost allocation. And I'm also concerned that some board members would seek direction to not allocate costs to the various millages. And I think that's inappropriate. That's called out in the ballot language, that as a voter, I was fully aware of that. And it should be allocated properly. Also, I would like to comment on, I would like to object to having the deputy treasurer in these meetings. She is not a member of this committee, and you may suggest that she's providing input to this meeting, but I will also suggest that as a deputy treasurer, the budget and finance is not under her purview, and she should only be allowed to comment as the public is allowed for 3 minutes at a time. Thank you.
Next person is Jonathan Greenberg.
Yeah, just wanted to double click and add to Kathleen's comments in terms of the inappropriateness of the deputy treasurer's participation. As well, I want to point out that about 3 months ago, I called shenanigans on Supervisor Hathaway, and no one took me serious. Well, your due is coming. You're going to have to resign. You cannot ignore a claim of shenanigans. Keep doing it to your peril. Thank you.
Next, you go to hands raised.
All right, then we're on to new business. The first one is I had a short presentation that I was preparing for this meeting just to start the discussion on the next fiscal year budget. And so let me see if I can get my screen share to work.
Oh, that's fine. I'll be fine. Yeah. Great.
Okay, and then let's see, we need to look.
Can people at home see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
All right, so I will be brief on this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to share a few thoughts with you. Some of this goes back to my days as an educator, so if you'll bear with me, and some of the things that I used to teach with MSU Extension. First and foremost, if I can get it going here we go. President Jefferson said it best that the ultimate authority and the ultimate power resides with the people themselves. So it is our job to inform them of how the system is supposed to work so they can make their own decisions on how they view their local governments and their state and their federal governments. I do want to acknowledge my colleagues from MSU, my former colleagues from MSU Extension. Many of the items here are taken and edited from the Fiscal Sustainability Program. The authors there were Dr. Scorsoni, Terry Gibb, Linda Stout, Eric Walcott, John Amarine, and myself. So I do wish to acknowledge the contributions.
There may be treatments.
Can we mute anyone who's speaking, please?
That are not powered,
Kitchen noise.
Yeah.
and it could be
Expensive.
expensive.
Can you,
Don't want to have given it away and then say, oh, kids, can you pay for my treatment?
all members of the audience, would you mute yourselves, please, so we can finish up?
Yeah, I do have. When a new person comes in, sometimes they're not automatically.
Okay, just a few thoughts here. For the local government, the budget is the most important document that you will do the entire year. It is a financial plan. It is also a policy statement. And so while the local units of government will have many decisions to make, their budget will be their most important. The one thing that I want to make sure everybody is understanding is that the budget is an ongoing cycle. It's not something that we do in a small period of time, or at least it shouldn't be. It should be something that we look at on an ongoing basis. So we're going to start over here with establishing vision and goals, setting priorities and objectives, then you develop the budget, you adopt the budget, you implement, and you monitor. And this process, it continues on an annual basis. The other thing is, this is kind of the same format, just gives you a little different structure to it. Concurrent cycles happen at the same time. So in other words, there's 4 general things that happen to the budget in any one period of time. It's prepared, it's adopted, it's implemented, it's reviewed, and it's audited. So right now, we are in the 2 center columns, the current fiscal year of 22 to 23. We just adopted the budget in March, and now we are in implementation, and we will be in implementation until the end of the fiscal year, a year from now in March of 2023. We are preparing for, and if you look at the left side, the last fiscal year, we are in the review or the audit phase of that. And if you look at the right side, we are getting ready for the fiscal year that will begin in April of 2023 and will go all the way to March of 2024. That's the document that should be looked at and considered as we go through this calendar year. So basically, when you say what year is it, it depends on what is the question. Are you talking about the current year, last year, or the next year? Because each one of those is going to have a different phase to it. The other piece of this is for fiscal sustainability going forward. Budgeting is done on an annual basis, but on the same token, you want to look at 3 to 5 years into the future to try and get some projections as to what types of things are going to take place. You want some long-term planning, and this goes all the way back to your goals and to your objectives. You want to take a look at your capital improvements, and your capital improvement plan should be updated on an annual basis. You want to look at your legacy costs, your OPEBs, and all of those types of things, and all the other operating costs that you should have. You must include performance measures, and I haven't seen a lot here. Maybe they've had some in the past, but I've not seen a lot of performance measures. That should be something to be considered going forward. In other words, how do you know if you've achieved the goal if it's not measured? So that's what the whole process is, the budgeting process, looking into the future, coming up with a plan for goals and objectives, implementing that plan, and then having some type of a performance measure to see how those goals were achieved or how that funding was achieved. The National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting is an organization that provides guidance, and they authorize or recommend, if you will, 4 distinct principles of effective budgeting, that you want some broad goals to guide your decisions. These are set by the governing body, whether you're talking a city, a county, a township, whatever it may be. Nonprofits could be in the same kind of category, but your governing body will set the long-term goals, the broad goals. Then you will develop strategies and financial policies to achieve those goals, so that when you're spending the taxpayers' money, you're actually spending it in terms of the goals that were decided upon by the governing body way back when the budget process started. And the whole budget is consistent with those strategies and goals. I know there are organizations out there, units of government out there, that when the department heads submit their budget requests for review, they need to specifically point to various goals and objectives that those expenditures of funds will be tied to. And then continually evaluate the performance and make adjustments. This is basically the budget amendments because no one knows what the future will be. You have to have some flexibility going forward, and that's what the whole idea with that would be. You can do budget amendments on a quarterly basis. Most units of government will do them twice a year, and what's most common, what I've seen, is they're tied to July and December, which coincides with the summer and winter tax bills. Also, the National Advisory Council will talk about the budget process in terms of these 5 effective strategies. And so you want that long-term perspective, you want that linkage, and you want budget decisions to be proactive, not reactive, going on results and outcomes. And you want good communication and effective communication with the stakeholders. That includes all members of the organization plus all members of the public. And it also gives good incentives to the local units for the management of the fiscal avenue, the budget, and the employees as well. 3 basic functions. It's pretty basic. Control over the budget process. Make sure that your expenditures is in line. You cannot have a deficit spending. We're not the federal government. We are not allowed to do that. You have a management piece of it, so that is appropriate, and you improve the process, the administrative and operational performance as you go over time. And then you have that planning. You set the overall direction, and you modify that as appropriate as you need to go through. You go through the calendar year. The other piece of that is it also will give you a template going forward that as you develop this process, you're going to develop a set of data points, if you will, so that you'll have additional data to make decisions going forward. Again, just recommendations for best budget practice, those very, very basic concepts. Assess your priorities, establish the goals, evaluate how you're addressing those goals, adopt your financial policies. You want an annual budget, but you do want some multi-year forecasting, and then make some comparisons as the year goes along. You can use a variety of techniques. This is just one example that you have a plan, and then the goals are tied to the plan, and then the objectives are tied to the goals. So this is basically how you would formulate a long-term objective. The department heads need to have adequate input into the budget process. They are going to be the most effective advocates for their offices and their departments. They'll be able to prioritize issues, and that input is going to be needed when the Board of Trustees, as the governing body, sets its long-term goals. The department heads are not going to set the overall objectives. That will be up to a policy decision of the governing body or the board itself. The department heads are going to need to implement that policy decision through their budget requests and the goals and objectives that they create for their own individual departments. Now, these goals and objectives do not have to be a thesis. They can be if you want to go into that level of detail. This one is an example. It's a one-page document. We've used it many times when I was at Extension. It came from, and does come from, the city of Novi. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, the governing body of the city of Novi, the city council, adopted a 4-tier plan for strategic goals, and it correlated to the acronym of Novi. That was their objective to do that. So you can be very basic with it, but you do have strategic goals, and then you have some long-term planning. But the other important piece of that is it comes back with a summary as to how you are implementing and gives a snapshot on a periodic basis of how we are doing going forward with what we're spending, what money is coming in, how we're achieving the objectives that we set for ourselves. So it's important that the Board of Trustees consider those objectives going forward so that you have a clearer understanding of how you're going to proceed making decisions into the future. Policy, budget is policy. It is a decision-making policy. You've got to get the people out of the issue. It's not about the people. It's about the issue as to how the funds are spent and allocated. What are the interests of the organization, and what does a good outcome look like? You need to blend ideas together if that's appropriate. You can do some incrementalism and expand different options. And maybe you have 2 or 3 departments that can come up with an idea that the board can take and modify that slightly, or maybe modify it greatly, but come up with a better plan for the overall organization. And then it's very critical that you have an objective criteria to measure how you're doing and what you're doing. It's kind of hard to know if you arrived at your destination if you didn't know the direction you were going in the first place. You want to make comparisons on a periodic basis, but the budget itself to the actual numbers that are coming in, and you want those performance measures as well, what was projected versus what actually has been done. You want good, sound financial policies. You want to talk about your reserve funds. Your fees and charges should be looked at least on a periodic basis, biannual if not annual. Take a look at your debts and how, if you have any bonds. Do you have one-time sources of revenue? Great example, the ARPA money. ARPA is one time, so we need to develop a long-term plan to spend that money wisely and continue to make sure that your budget is a balanced budget going forward. As they say, we're not the federal government. It is recommended for a 5-year forecast into the future. Again, that's an estimate. We certainly understand that that is an estimate. However, you budget 1 year at a time, but if you can get that 3 to 5 year idea of what may look into the future and what some of the long-term goals of the organization will be. As you're looking at that 5-year document, it's important to note right there the last line item. It rolls forward 1 year at a time. And basically what that's saying is we will develop it, hypothetically we'll develop it for in the year 2022, and it will extend all the way out to 2027. So next year we'll drop off 22 and we'll add 2028. So it's an ongoing cycle. It literally will roll forward one year at a time. Same idea. Are you projecting the same level of service? Are you projecting continued increases in service? I know there's some projections about expanding staff, expanding township protocols for different services, whether that's public safety or something else. So those are the long-term projections you need to take a look at. Again, projecting revenue and expenditures. Be very clear on your revenue projections. State shared revenues are coming out on an annual basis. That information is available from the state of Michigan. Property tax revenues is a simple calculation of the certified. In this case, it's a very easy calculation because your numbers are certified. Your millage rates will be certified, and I'm talking just the general fund. So I'm talking the 1 mil. Or in this case, the rollback takes it down, I think, to 0.91, something like that. But it's the Headley rollback number, and then the certified number from the assessor of the current year's taxable value. And that will give you a very good indication of what property tax revenues would be. State shared revenues are still your number one source of revenue. So take a look also at salaries and wages. Are we competitive with the market? And also how we're doing our capital expenditures. The other piece here, remember the economy. No one predicted COVID, understandable. But on the same token, keep an eye on what the Fed is doing, keep an eye on what the state of Michigan is doing, and what the federal government itself is doing, not just the monetary system. So that you've got an idea. You don't want to project 5, 6, 7% growth when the Fed is trying to raise interest rates or what have you. So you want to make sure that you're taking a good look at all the data that's available. And just to finish up, forecasting is not perfect, understandable. It's your best estimate, but you want as much data as possible to make that estimate worthwhile. Get the public involved. We need to have the public there for some opinion, and it's their money, so we want them to have some input into it. Take a look at the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act. There's some things in there that we'll talk about what's appropriate to have for the budget. This is one I want to spend just a little bit of time on to finish up here. This is a suggestion, this is a recommendation. that the Board of Trustees adopts short and long-term goals at a work session, probably in May. This is just a tentative timetable. The board can adjust it as they see fit. They can adopt it as presented, or they cannot adopt it. That's a board policy decision. But the recommendation is for short and long-term goals to be developed. Then the budget timeline is developed. Departments and committees will start submitting their requests in June and July. Requests are then reviewed, and those revenue projections are there based on the data that's available at the time. Now, it's not going to be 100% accurate because not everything is available yet, but it's good estimates. So see what the projected revenues will be, what the expenditure requests are. Then start holding some work sessions in September and October to get the public involved and get more information to the Board of Trustees ahead of time. Get some preliminary revisions and drafts. Additional changes by department heads will come out, and then start looking at fiscal year-end projections in January, because again, your fiscal year is going to end in March 31 of next year, and then you have your final work session in February and your final public hearing and adopt the budget at the first meeting in March. It's also, by that point in time, you will have absolute final numbers from the assessor. The assessment roll is certified on or before the first Monday of March. So therefore, that taxable value number will be a certified number, and then just apply whatever millage rate and then make any final adjustments on your budget as appropriate. And then lastly, I just wanted to share some thoughts here that you will need your budget progress reports. These are year-to-date expenditures and revenues, the investment reports, there's annual reports, and there should also be monthly reviews on status of all the accounts as you go through the calendar year. We have statutes if we don't have a balanced budget, and we don't want to go there with that. We want to maintain that. And just to finish up, make sure everyone is clear on taxable value, because that's going to generate your property tax. So members of the public, this is how your contribution to the revenue is going to be calculated. Cap value is proposal A. It limits the growth to 5%, or the rate of inflation, whichever is less, minus the loss and additions. These are basically physical changes to your property. So if you tear something down, like an old garage, and you add on a 24 by 24 addition, those items will be calculated into the value. But property taxes is simply a straight calculation. It's the old variables from your high school algebra. A times B equals C. It's as simple as that. Where A is the number of mills, B is the property tax, and C then B is the taxable value, and C is the property tax. Number of mills are set by statute. They're rolled back by Headley. Taxable value is calculated every year by the assessor within the statutes of Proposal A and the General Property Tax Act. And then lastly, the mill, because I've had this question for literally 30 years. What the heck is a mill? It's 1/10 of a cent, it's 1/1000th of a dollar, or another way to say it, it is $1 of revenue generated from each mill on $1,000 of value. So again, it's expressed as a decimal, and that will give you your property tax. And then lastly, this is from a different class that I taught. This is the actual tax bill that I modified from a property in the city of Mount Pleasant. This was their summer and winter tax bill. And the reason I did this for a different class, and I wanted to share it here, I wanted to make sure everyone understands that when I'm talking about the mills, this is what I'm talking about. So look at the top line there, city operating 12.41. That's the city of Mount Pleasant. It's not Scio Township, that's the city of Mount Pleasant. But your tax bill is going to be similar. It will say township operating as opposed to city operating. The difference is that number is going to be 0.91 something, because we're limited to 1 mill as a general law township. Cities are limited to 20 mills, so it's a different animal. But the concept is there. You also see that the city or the local unit collected all of its money in the summer, and that the school collected money in both summer and winter. The county, in this case Isabella, collected almost all of its money in the winter, a little bit in the summer, which was the county operating, and then the district library was in the summer. So the point in all of this is these are all of the millages these are all of the units of government that levy millage in your organization or your township. So you're going to have operating for the local unit, you're going to have intermediate school districts of some kind, you're going to have school districts of some kind, and you're going to have various millages for the county. So just be aware that one bill is going to be bigger than the other. And the last point I will make is the one that's there, that's school operating, highlighted in red. If this is your home, members of the public, if this is your home, make sure that that number is 0, because you need to file your principal residence exemption if you've not done so. You are exempt from 18 mills of school operating if it is your principal residence. So, you're entitled to that exemption, take advantage of it. So that, in a nutshell, is a summary of what I wanted to share with you on the budget process going forward. So members of the community, if you have questions for me, just send me an email if you would, and I'll be happy to answer that, because at this kind of a meeting, we can have dialogue back and forth. All right? With that, let me stop the screen share.
This is really helpful. I like the formal and well-defined process slide, the kind of suggested timeline for the township.
And that's a recommendation.
Yeah.
So as I say, I can present that to the Board of Trustees for its consideration. It can look at it, adopt it, modify it, or not adopt it as the board sees fit.
That's great. Thank you.
Can you send me the
Yes.
slide? Sure,
Mhm.
I'd like to have that.
Please, yes, I can. All right. Next item then is the open space millage proposal. Administrative costs and cost allocation, I think, is all one item there.
Yeah, and Barry, thanks for being here. I just wanted to talk about, the issue of administrative costs, and let's stick to that and away from cost allocation, because I think that's more about how we distribute the administrative costs. Come on up, Barry. Feel free to join us at the table if you want.
Barry, if you sit there, at least you'll be on the camera. So everyone can see you.
So everyone can see you.
I'm sorry. Well,
So the last millage that we put on the ballot was the Parks and Paths millage.
Yes.
And at that time, we had a discussion and put in place the not to exceed 15% of administrative costs clause in the millage. And I think some sort of provision in millages, such as the open space millage that we're going to go for, it's important to have some sort of provision in there for the administrative costs, because I think that they're real. I think that it makes it clear to voters that there'll be some administrative costs. And whether it's, I think you said, 6 or 7% or something, whatever it is, I think it's important to put it out there about how much is going to administrative costs and how much is not. In my experience, I've seen sometimes nonprofits and others sometimes underreport their real administrative costs, to try to show that, as much as possible is going to the direct service. And I get that, and I appreciate that. But I think that our voters understand that the reality is that there are administrative costs created by the open space program, Parks and Paths, and others. So I just wanted to talk about what kind of provision we might put in the proposed millage for the open space to ensure that, some of the administrative cost is put forth.
And so when you say administrative costs, are you referring to the things that I reported in my quarterly report and in the annual report?
Yes, so those, and I think also some of the things in the cost allocation plan. I will say, it's certainly not trying to cover costs we haven't covered before, but historically, and Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, the funds that these costs were distributed to were fire, water, and sewer. And so starting last year, with the exception of the audit costs, and last year was the first year that we distributed it more broadly, which I think is appropriate because from my perspective, we were pulling too much from water, sewer, and fire. We weren't doing some sort of fair distribution. We had the manager's salary, some buildings and grounds, finance staff, audit costs. I think that's about it.
There were other costs that was distributed directly. You know, like, if a particular department bought computers, they were charged those
Sure.
directly rather than, you know, in a distribution program. Programs for said computers were the same way.
Yeah.
And there were other programs that were distributed by the amount of use.
Okay, yeah, good. So all of this is to say, these are costs that we have shared for years, and we can talk about how to share them. But I do think, I feel strongly that, you know, some of the large funds, such as open space and parks, should bear whatever the right amount is of the administrative costs.
So I'm hearing two different kinds of administrative costs here.
Mhm.
One is the cost for me to administer the program for the last, I think we have 17 years worth of audited information at this point. And so it's a very clear number that it's 7% of the total revenues that have been expended are to cover my time. So we've got nearly 20 years of experience at that. And so I guess I would question whether that needs to be more formally stated in a ballot proposal. And then the second one is the administrative costs that the township overall bears to assist in the administration of the program, which I would argue is being covered by me. There's very little additional expenditure that I'm aware of that falls on other people. I mean, I depend on Christy every now and then to print off a document for me.
It's not much.
And I know that you know, checks get cut, and I know we pay an audit fee out of our village proceeds. Not huge, but you know, it's there as a line item. I'm not clear on what other costs, administrative costs, are being borne by the township generally to operate the program.
So I would say you kind of hit them. So some portion, and it's small because there aren't many checks. And I have the cost allocation here, but basically looking at, you know, we look at the number of cash receipts that come in, not many. We look at the number of AP checks that are cut, some. We look at the audit costs, the number of computers. You all have none, so your item is 0 for technology. The distribution of Township Hall, your distribution is 0. You know, you don't have a office or, you know, aren't using the space. So it's really the audit cost, the financial staff, and I think that's it.
Yeah, and the audit costs are already being covered, so it's just the financial staff.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the number that was adopted in the budget.
That was actually changed last year. It's not being done directly. It's being done through this cost allocation plan.
Yeah, it's been in, you know, a line item.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, and part of why we did that, Barry, was what was happening is when bills would come in, staff would say, you know, have to split a bill like 8 different ways, 6 different ways.
Sure.
And so it's like, if you know that you're going to have these recurring costs of, you know, utilities and things like that, I have to apologize because I had this here and I'm having trouble finding it right now. But Barry, generally speaking, and the other thing I'm mindful of is, you know, you do this at a very, you know, so efficiently, and we're so lucky to have you, and that will not be the case forever. And so we also need to be realistic about how the open space, you know, program, as it becomes more integrated, costs are going to go up. You know, I mean, costs would go up, hiring a staff, you know, anything like that, even part of a staff, that's higher. So I guess I'm just thinking when we're asking for this long-term millage, isn't now the time to kind of, because I think voters would say, like, okay, yeah, no more than 10% administrative costs or 15% administrative costs, whatever it is. Yeah. I don't think anybody's holding on to the 7%, you know, versus something else that's reasonable. And 15 is, I don't think anybody would blink at that, but tell me if you think that's different.
Well, I would also make a distinction between the types of land conservation projects that we do.
Okay.
One of them is to purchase land outright, what we call fee simple interests
Yeah.
in land, where the township owns them
Right.
and makes them accessible to the public. And so the LPC millage is intended for the acquisition of the property and the costs related to that, the due diligence, my time, et cetera. But now that we have a Parks and Recreation Advisory Board and a separate millage for that purpose, then those costs are to develop the properties, make them accessible, put in the parking lot, all those kinds of things are borne by that program, not by the open space millage. So there's not, and I know there's discussions about hiring a person to be involved with that, but that's completely separate from what I do through this millage. And then the other piece of it is acquiring conservation easements on properties. And once we have acquired the easements, the responsibility in perpetuity is to ensure that the agreement is being upheld between the landowner and the land trust. And as you know, we have one issue that we're dealing with right now. It's the first one I've ever had to deal with in 30 years, thankfully. And a lot of that is based on building relationships with landowners and new landowners, because properties do change hands. And hopefully we avoid those kinds of things. And so if the program ended tomorrow, or at the end of this current millage, the responsibility for monitoring those properties would be ongoing. But it's a pretty minimal cost. And off the top of my head, I don't know how many easements that we hold. It's probably 20 at this point, maybe 30. I think that it takes about 3 hours of my time to go through the whole process of pulling out the baselines from the basement and writing a letter, making a phone call, walking the property, filling out the form, following up. It's about 3 hours worth of time. So if it's 30 easements and it's 3 hours, it's 90 hours, and my rate for that is $60. It's not something that, so it's a pretty small cost. It's $5,000 or something like that.
Right.
It's not something that you would need to hire a full-time or even a part-time person to do.
Of course.
You know, in the future, would it be passed on to the Parks Committee? Perhaps. But in the short term, it's a small cost that the program is currently incurring as long as we have the millage to cover that. We also have agreed to set aside a minimum of $10,000 per easement so that when the millages are all complete, we have a funding source not only for covering someone's time, whether that's me or somebody else, to monitor those easements, but also then a legal defense fund so that if we run into another problem, we've got something we can tap into. We don't have to go to the general fund or some other fund to deal with that. So we've made those long-term considerations already, and the cost overall in the program is quite small. Now, to your question about whether should there be something in the millage language about limiting costs, I suppose that could be done. I would just say we've got 18 years or 17 years of experience and the data to prove it. So that if anybody asks, you can just say, here's what it is. It's 7%.
It's 7% of
total expenditures.
Correct, of your time. And then, when I look at the cost allocation, what we had proposed was $30,616 is what it came out to, and we used the same formula. And I'm looking at that, and it looks like, the audit, that would be using the method we used last year, which distributes audit and audit costs based on the size of the fund. But maybe it's more fair to look at kind of the amount of activity in the fund. I don't know if that might be more fair.
The 30,000 figure was proposed but not adopted.
Yeah, you didn't include it in the proposed budget, and it was not adopted. But that was the method we had all agreed on. So it was, and I'm looking at that, looks like most of it was coming from the fact that you have a large fund balance, but it's not a very active fund, I agree.
Right, we use it, other than paying me, which is a monthly thing, but for actual large-scale expenditures, it's several times a year. Of course, when we do that, it's $500,000 at a time. Or
Yeah.
$1 million at a time.
Yeah, but it's just as easy to write a $500,000 check as
Right.
it is a $5 check.
Yeah, gotcha.
So, okay, so maybe it's that, with the cost allocation, maybe it's also that the audit, because it looks like that's what's kind of driving up more than you expected. What was adopted, Will?
The figure I have is, we put in for, just to cover the audit expense was $250. That's what the share was. The prior year figure I see is, that was done through the cost allocation that Woodhill instituted. I see $5,638.
Right, and the reason why it's more, why it's 30,616 would be under that same formula is because of the increase in costs for finance and treasury and the increased cost for our audit, which we're estimating about 75,000 this year. So it's not that it was distributed any differently, it's just that the actual proposed costs in the budget are much higher, the costs that we adopted. So, but I do think it's a good point for the cost allocation plan to look at audit and distribute it not just based on size of fund, but maybe some balance between size of fund and how active a fund is. What do you think?
I agree, because just because a fund has a very large number that it either has in fund balance or cash, or that it does in expenditures, it doesn't mean it's costing the township a lot of time to manage that.
Right. So we could do like the size of fund balance and the money spent or number of AP checks or something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Some portion, because,
I haven't given much thought to whether using fund balance is an accurate way to go, but it doesn't seem like it's an accurate way
so,
to determine a cost-sharing program.
It's sort of like saying, this fund has more money, so let's take more money from it.
well, that's one perspective. This is the allocation unit and the method of allocation. And so what we're talking about right here, of course, is right here, right? The audit, size of fund balance and working capital. Most of the costs here are here, and it's split, and you don't have any employees in open space. So you don't get hit for having any employees,
That's
any
right.
computers, any space, any of that.
Any vehicles, nothing.
Right.
You essentially farm that out. to
Absolutely.
me,
So you've
my
got
business as a contractor.
0 township hall space, 0 computers. So we could look at this allocation here, is what we're talking about, doing differently. But when you all look at the other allocation of the finance director, consultants, managers, these are the metrics that we used. Deputy treasurer, about 40% cash receipts. So these are the methods, and then here, and I know we've explained this a lot, so I'm sorry if this is repetitive, but like with the, finance director position, it's 75% number of employees, 25% money spent. So there's different ways to distribute this. Sandy, for you, and I used the same 40% we'd had for cash receipting last year, so I just pulled that over. And then 60% is excluded because that's, of course, covered by the tax admin fee. So I'm just looking for, solutions generally, because we do have real costs. I agree on the audit. What about the financial processing? I mean, we just do it by AP checks here. So when we look at open space, you know, you've only got 45 AP checks in a year, right? And so what does that equal? That's like $3. That's not where your cost is coming from. You know, the cost is coming from really these finance positions. And that's, I think it's insofar as we're looking at size of fund balance. Or money, no, it's the dollars spent. That's what it is. That's what's driving your costs, is the dollars spent. Because you do very few transactions, but you spend a lot of money. So that might also, for the open space fund, be something we could fairly look at kind of adjusting due to the activity. Okay, I just wanted to kind of see why that was so much more. So it's the activity of the fund and the money spent. So all of this is to say, you know, how do we make sure that when we put the proposal before the voters that we're honest about the administrative costs and just straightforward, because voters are smart, they understand things cost money. How would you recommend we do that this year?
Are you asking, should it be in the ballot language?
I don't think there's a necessity. I mean,
I agree.
It's that we've got a millage that's been in place for what, close to 20 years now, and a program that's been very successful. I don't understand why we would want to tinker with it. I think actually the presentation that you just went through, Clerk Flintoff, illustrates that there really isn't a lot of administrative cost that is incurred, and that this has really been operating as a very lean operation. You know, for whatever reason, I think, you know, your leadership, Barry, and
That's what it is, frankly.
successive generations of the leadership of you know, land preservation commissioners, I think we have a really good program. I'm very reluctant to sort of mess with it just for the sake of messing with it.
Now, David, you were gonna draft up language. I'm sure you haven't done it yet, and that's fine. But there was that whole, you know, language of like what's a renewal and what's not a renewal. And my understanding is we're necessarily have to change the language somehow. Is that correct?
Well, Barry sent me several documents, which I've had. I've also started some additional research into language historically for these types of things. The original millage was 0.5, and I need to get a certified number as to what it is right today. It's 0.4 something, I think.
Yeah,
Is it?
4.8 something like
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So let's just use that. So the 0.48 is the current number that is certified right now. So basically, the way the language would say something to the effect that the current language is 0.48, the addition or the restoration or whatever the proper language is to get it back to 0.5. So it's not a renewal of 0.5, it's renewal of 0.8, or 4.8 rather, with the request to restore the override value that was done over the course of time because of Edward.
Correct.
The missing 0.02.
Right, it's not a lot, not a lot, but technically there's two different pieces.
But
It's one vote, though.
Yes, it's one vote, thank you.
Yes, it's one vote. So the public's not voting on the 4.8 and then the Headley override. It's included in the language, but the language has to identify that there actually is two pieces to it to get it to the 0.5.
Correct. And it can still be called a renewal in our campaign materials and other things, which is an advantage to be able to say this is not a new tax, it's a renewal of something you've been paying, and one that's been very successful now for a long time. We've done all this terrific work. We're operating at a very low administrative rate, and I think it has a good chance to succeed with voters on that basis.
We just have to be clear in the language, that's all I'm saying,
Yeah.
as to what it is that the voters are approving. I mean, it's not an increase over the original 0.5, that is very true.
Correct.
Anything else on this topic? Okay. All right.
Thanks, Barry.
Then the last piece is kind of a status question to the committee. The next the next regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Standing Committee will take place on May 19th. Because of my announcement at the last board meeting, I will not be here on May 19th. So therefore, we need to at least consider the status of the Budget and Finance Committee going forward, or ask the Board of Trustees for its views, or basically have a conversation as, for lack of a better way to say it, what do we do now? So that's kind of what the point of item number, it gave me numbers and numbers. It was supposed to be alphabet, so I apologize for that. It's 6-5. It's supposed to be 6, what is it, A, B, C, D, E. It should be 6E, but it's 6-5 on the agenda, so.
It's understandable.
Yeah, it's the word program. So, thoughts, comments? This is discussion. I do not have a motion at this exact moment.
Well, the charge to the committee established that the township administrator would be the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. And in the absence of the chair, that the supervisor would be the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. So I think really we've got, in the language of the committee charge, we have an answer to the question if needed. Now, it may be that by that time we have in place a township administrator or an interim township administrator. It's possible, in which case that individual would be, by the committee's charge, the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. But if not, we have a fallback position.
I understand the point. I would just offer the opinion that I would have taken the board's charge to mean that the supervisor, as the vice chair, would assume the chair in the absence if I wasn't here today, as opposed to not being here permanently.
Well, I suppose.
I don't think that, it wasn't in my intention at the time the charge was adopted. Can't imagine that was in the mind of the board itself when the charge was originally created, but.
I objected to it at the time because I was concerned about something like this happening. I don't think there's a definition of what a vice chair means. I think practically speaking, it wouldn't work. I think it would just add more of the challenges that I think that the board was trying to avoid when it redid the charge and paid Foster Swift a lot to redo the charge. And so I would say, honestly, the leadership of the Budget and Finance Committee is probably the least of my concerns, given David's departure. It's important, but I think that the board needs to look at all of David's duties and make a proposal about who's going to fill each of his duties in whatever interim there is, because it will, in the absence of that, it'll be me and a few other women in the office, as always, carrying it all. And, we just need to be deliberate. And I would ask also, Will, that we have a conversation at Tuesday's meeting about what planning steps we can take, given David's announcement, in terms of either seeking out an interim or debriefing, kind of figuring out whatever next steps there are.
So I think we're probably done with this topic, unless there's a motion that you had.
Well, I would just offer the opinion that and maybe this, I don't know if this falls to me, because I'm still the chair, I'm still the administrator until May 16th, so I don't know if it falls to me to make the decision or not. But I would strongly suggest that there not be a May meeting of the Budget and Finance, that the next meeting be scheduled, the regular meeting be scheduled for June. And by that time, the board would have an opportunity to consider whether it wants an interim or how it wants to proceed. That would just be a suggestion.
Well, why would we not have a meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee? That seems sort of odd. And it says right here in the charge, I just pulled it up, it says the Budget and Finance Committee shall be vice chaired by the supervisor. The vice chairperson is authorized to serve as chairperson if the chairperson is absent. It doesn't say, absent for whatever reason. It just says absent.
Absent truly will. Absent means something different than not, than resigned.
Well, that's one way that a township administrator could be absent, yes.
All I'm suggesting, with all due respect to the elected officials sitting on either side of me, I do not believe it's in the township's best interest for the Budget and Finance Committee to revert back to what it was prior to October of last year. That's all I'm suggesting. I think you need time to decide what it is that the board wants to do going forward. And quite frankly, I don't think past experience has done a Budget and Finance Committee well. That's all I'm suggesting.
We have had some problems. That's why we redid the charge back in January, I believe. The meeting schedule is established. We voted on that at the last meeting.
True.
And we have a structure in place to deal with this situation. I suppose the board could decide that it would follow your suggestion, but that's, I think, a board decision. It's not a decision that we need to make here today.
I would like the board to talk about, I would ask for David's recommendation, when you're ready, David, on all of your duties and, and what your recommendation would be for coverage during the whatever interim period there is. And I want to thank you for your leadership of the Budget and Finance Committee during this short time. It was a great presentation today as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And as I said, I'm just sorry this is how the situation is. I was hoping we could move this committee forward with several presentations like this as we would have gone through the year to make some recommendations to the board for its consideration to improve the whole process. But as I say, it is what it is.
Well, I appreciate the presentation today. I think that was really helpful, sort of overall context, and I'll be glad to have slides to refer to in the future.
All right, well, thank you. Last item then, any other committee member announcements? Anything you would like to announce